First of all, I'm talking about sports. No! My name's 8-Bit Music Theory. I run a YouTube channel called 8-Bit Music Theory, and I take apart video game tunes and analyze the music theory. It's a very straightforward operation, you know. Theoretically. Today, I was asked to give an advanced panel, so I was thinking, what do I know that's advanced? Well, this is not going to entirely be an advanced panel, because I'm going to talk about 7 levels of reharmonization. So the first couple levels, at least, will be pretty simple, I think. But I think reharmonization in general is an advanced thing to do, right? Kind of. Actually, how many of you have seen the recent... Oh. Sorry. It's okay. How many of you have seen the recent Adam Neely video of the same title? Yeah. Okay. This is originally going to be my latest YouTube video, and I was going to do a panel on chordioids, and then I saw that Neely video drop, and I was like, ah, crap. So I shuffled some stuff around, and hopefully this works in panel form. All right, let's get going. Reharmonization, what is it? It is when you take a tune, any tune, and you keep the melody the same, but you change the chords that happen underneath. It's very common in jazz. In jazz, there's a long history of taking show tunes and folk tunes and reharmonizing them to fit with the jazz model of, you know, how jazz sounds. And it's also used all the time in arrangements. If you like or listen to any video game cover artists, they'll often do a lot of reharmonizing to fit whatever style they're going for. Why should you care about this? Well, if you want to be a cover artist or a musician in general or a composer, it can be a very helpful, fun thing to learn how to do or learn a little bit more about. And does it provide a fun and educational outlet for beginner musicians and experienced composers alike? I'd say it does. So that's why I wanted to talk about it. And I tried to break it up into 7 levels of difficulty or complexity. They're not going to be the same as Adam Neely's video, don't worry. So yeah, let's start off, let's get moving. Let's just go. So for this presentation, I'm going to be reharmonizing Kakariko Village 7 times. And you can kind of see how it evolves. Is that big enough? Can you see all the chords and everything? Oh no, is it not? That's too bad. There's nothing we can do about it. So you might have to strain your eyes on some of these, but for all of the sheet music I'm going to put up, some of it will be in block chords, some of it will be in nice arpeggios like it is here, but I'm always going to have them written out just as a big chord for the bar. Just take all of these notes for each bar and smush them into one notation so you can easier see the chords and how they're voiced and all that kind of stuff. So, you guys excited? Woo! Me too. Let's get going. Let's do it. Level 1. So this is the easiest level, and it's about simple substitutions. So basically, my process for reharmonizing in this level is to identify the function of the original chords and then figure out other chords that you could take from the same key that basically do the same thing. So if we look at our original here, we'll see that the main kind of 4-chord loop that happens for the A section, and it goes off into its own thing a few bars in, but is a B flat, G minor, C minor, 11, F7. So. It's a very, very common progression. And basically what's happening is you're starting on the tonic chord, B flat, that's home, and you're moving your way over to F, and then resolving back to B flat. So the function of the chords are you want to start on B flat, and you want to end on a chord that sets up a move to B flat, and everything in the middle is just kind of getting you from point A to point B. So using my diatonic substitutions. Well, I kind of missed something, actually. Do you want to listen to the original first? Okay, let's listen to the original first. B section. So I didn't reharm the whole thing for each of these examples because listening to the whole tune 7 times would be a lot. But so this one I just took the A section and was thinking what I could do with it. So for the initial 4-chord part, I'm ending on a F chord. It's an F sus chord, so I changed the quality from dominant to sus, but it has the same pull back to B flat. Well, it's technically an E flat over F. Which is pretty common as well. But the 2 middle chords I decided to change, and I figured, well, I could do like a walk up to the F. Instead of doing kind of a circle of fifths, fourths motion from G minor to C minor to F, which is fourths, I could walk up D to E flat to F. So, and then on the second phrase, instead of doing the same thing twice, because who wants to do the same thing twice, I flipped it around. I said, well, I can walk up to F. I can also walk down to F. So I did a bass walk down. And then I thought, okay, how could I harmonize each of those notes? B flat is obviously B flat. A could be like an A diminished thing, but that's a little gross. So how about D minor over A? That's nice. G minor for G, easy. F7 for F. It's all it's very straightforward. I'm going to play that much and then talk about the next part. And you can hear how it sounds. It works, right? Totally fits. And it feels different. The chords are different, and you can tell, like, that's not quite the same. But it totally is functionally the same. And it's kind of fun to just explore, even in this simple of a level, it's fun to just explore different things you can do. I went through a bunch of iterations before I picked this one of like different ways of even keeping the first 2 chords the same, different ways to get from B flat to F. There's a lot of options. For the beginner harmonizers, reharmonizers among you, I will say one hot tip, which is quite useful, is the relative minor tip. So basically every chord has a relative minor chord, and every major chord has a relative minor chord. Every minor chord has a relative major chord. So B flat and G minor are cousins. And you can basically swap one out for the other anytime, any place, no problem. Almost, but pretty much. So that's a good easy trick of like, well, in this 9th bar and the 3rd stave there, originally that's an E flat to F to B flat, right? So for the E flat chord, I thought, well, I could just change that out for its relative minor, so C minor. And then the B flat, we'll trade that out for its relative minor too. So you'll see how it sounds. And I did the reverse in the last line. There was a C minor moving to F, moving to B flat, the same as we heard in the intro. And I replaced the C minor with its relative major, E flat. So it's almost the same notes. There's only one note different between these two chords, and it just gives it a little bit of a different flavor. So let's hear how this sounds. It works. I won't speak to the quality of the music, but it's functional. Spoilers. That's going to be weird. Level 2, adding chromaticism. So for this level, you're going to bump it up a notch. You know, the original chords are cool, and sticking within the key is cool. But, you know what's even cooler is adding notes from outside the key and trying to figure out how to do that in a way that sounds nice, or at least doesn't sound horrible. So a really easy way to do it is to fill in gaps between chords that are already part of the song with some kind of secondary dominant or other kind of, you know, this is where you kind of pull from your grab bag of chord progressions that you may already know. So like if you already know the level complete chord progression, the A flat to B flat to C, you can take that as a little harmonic chunk. If you were in my panel yesterday, you'll know about stealing chunks like that, and just kind of plug it into your reharms and see how they fit. I will say, I forgot to point this out on the level 1 slide. For all of this stuff, you always have to keep the melody in mind as like your top focus. Always be very aware of what the melody is on top of any new chord you're putting in, because sometimes you'll come up with a progression that works as a progression, and you'll be excited about it, and then when you put it in, you realize the melody note clashes really bad. Like, I want to do that, but I can't. If you change the melody, then it's not a reharm, it's just a new song, which, you know, that's cool too. But so here, I thought, what's a fun way to get to the C minor chord in bar 3, other than that uses some kind of chromatic note? How about a B diminished? So you get that nice walk up. The middle chord's kind of raunchy, but resolves really nicely. So that was one thing I used. Then I threw in a bunch of secondary dominants. So that G minor in the second line, I thought, well, you could approach that by a D7 chord, because that's the G minor's secondary dominant. But then I thought, well, the melody has a B flat and an F in it. Does that make sense to put over a D7 chord? Gross. Who thinks, you know, well, for those of you who aren't jazz nerds or haven't been to jazz school, you might think, that seems a little suspect. But for those of you who are jazz nerds, you'll know that anything works over a dominant chord. It doesn't matter at all. Major chords, no, chill out. Minor chords, you know, be careful. Dominant chords, anything goes. The stupider, the better. You can make it work. So this is a great opportunity to flex like my flat 13, sharp 9 dominant muscles. What else is in there? So I kept the E flat in the third line the same, but I approached it with the secondary 2-5. So it's like a secondary dominant, but you're extending that dominant progression to a longer, instead of just, you're doing a little, it's just the same idea, it's just stretched out a little bit. And for that one, I got to sneak in a nice little tasty flat 9, because it's a dominant chord and anything goes. And mostly, there's a couple other secondary dominants that you'll hear, the A7 to D minor. That one fit really nice because it's a big A in the melody. The G7 flat 9, oh, that's a weird one. So G7 flat 9 I put because it's supposed to approach a C minor chord. In the original, the beginning of the fourth line is C minor. But I put the G7 there, and then I decided to change out the C minor for an E flat, and I kept the G7 there. And it kind of works still. So that's a fun thing to play around with. And I got to use that juicy major 4 to minor 4 to 1, which works really well with the melody, with the 7th and the 6th in the melody coming down to the root. It worked really well. I was really happy with it. So that's why I traded out the C minor for an E flat at that point. That was a lot of info. I should have played the first half before talking about the second half, but you know, we're all learning here. Okay, let's go. Works, right? There's some spots where you're like, oh, but then it resolves and you go, oh, okay. So this is where, you know, for me, I think reharms kind of have a reputation of being crazy and like just insane off the wall. And they usually are because it's such a good vehicle to experiment with ideas that are crazy. Because, you know, you don't have to try and write a melody that, like you have a melody that you know works and a harmony that you know works. And you can just go, well, does it work if I, you know, step out here or change this or make this really stupid? And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. But it's a great vehicle for that kind of experimentation, as you'll see in the coming levels. Now, the next 3 levels are kind of a set because they're all about trying to reharm the melody into a new key without changing the original melody. And this is a really fun exercise that I do a lot just to see if I can. So the melody is mostly a B-flat triad. Not that. Structurally, it's mostly just a big B-flat triad, which makes it really easy to reharmonize because there's not that many notes to reharmonize. So if bar, you know, if that gross D7 with the flat 13 and sharp 9, if there were 5 notes in that measure, I would have to figure out how to make all of them fit with a D7 chord. But with only 2 notes, it's a lot easier to deal with. So this was a perfect melody to use for this kind of presentation. So the easiest option is an extension of the relative minor idea. Just change out the whole key to be the relative minor key. It usually works like without having to do anything too weird because they're so like all B flat major and G minor have the same notes in the key. So like usually it's fine. Sometimes it gets a little weird, but as long as you keep the melody in mind, it's pretty doable. So I kind of just picked a really generic G minor chord progression, kind of like a hit the road jack. It's a little, you know, Vegas-y, but it works with the chord progression, and it makes it sound kind of goofy. And I tried as much as possible to keep the same relationships. So when it went to the 4 chord in the original, I would try and go to the new 4 chord in the new key and stuff like that. And I did the bridge for this one too, and I did the same, sit on the 4 chord and then do a 1 chord in first inversion, but now it's the minor version. So this is kind of like a fun Kakariko Village in the apocalypse kind of vibe. Let's see if it works. It worked, right? This is a fun one, especially if you're kind of new to reharm. This is a fun way to like complete a full reharm that works and it's not that hard, and then you have one under your belt. So the next in the series of different keys is a slightly more distant key, but still one that's pretty close. So if you think in terms of key signatures, B flat has 2 flats. Anything that had, like E flat, the 4 chord, has 3 flats. It's only 1 note different. Shouldn't be too hard to make work. I tried doing a version in the key of F, which is also 1 flat different, and it sounded terrible. And I don't know why. It just didn't work at all. And I don't know if it's because the melody is so focused on B flat, which is the 4th of F, and that's a really weird note in the key to pick to focus on. That's my best guess. But for whatever reason, it just sounded awful. And so I went with the 4 key. But different melodies will be different, will be easier to put into different keys. And we'll talk about that more a little bit later. But for now, let's check out our E flat major version of Kakariko Village. So I did the whole thing again. I tried to kind of branch out. Here, let's talk about this. So for the most part, the melody fit really well. The A natural doesn't exist in the key of E flat, right? So anytime an A natural came along, I had to figure out some way to contextualize that made sense. So for the A flat in the 3rd line of the A section, I made it a D flat 7 sharp 5. Now you may be thinking, D flat's not in the key of E flat either, and that's kind of why it works, because it's just like that whole bar is like, this is a weird one, get used to it. But it's still a flat 7 to 1 resolution, which is not uncommon. You hear it like it's kind of weird, but you hear that happens in tunes, especially coming off of the 4 chord, this kind of, that's something that exists in music. So that worked out really nicely. And then because the original goes to the 4 chord in the B section, I thought it'd be fun to see if I could go to the new 4 chord in this B section, which would be A flat. So we're getting a little farther. And there's a big A natural in the 2nd bar of the 1st and 3rd line, but I figured I could make that part of an F dominant chord and make a really generic 1, 6, 2, 5 with a dominant 6. This. Doesn't sound out of place at all. So this one I'm actually kind of proud of. It really worked. Let's just play it. There's one, it kind of works, right? There's a couple spots that are a little iffy, but the thing that kills me is the ending, honestly. The ending doesn't work to me. Like this, bing, boom, boom, it doesn't feel right. And it's ending on the 5th of the new key, so it doesn't feel resolved. And that just hurt my heart to decide to leave in, but for the purposes of the example. Like one thing to keep in mind here is, these are great exercises. If you ever want to do a real arrangement that you're gonna have people listen to and they're supposed to enjoy, you wouldn't just put it in the key of 4 and leave it there. This is a good exercise to learn how do I deal with harmonizing these notes in a way that functions, and then you can take bits out and put that into your normal compositional life. I will point out there's a couple kind of weird things that I did. Oh, you know what I did? I kind of just stole the progression to There'll Never Be Another You, which is a jazz standard. And it has that 4 to flat 7. And also, there's something else I saw that reminded me of that. But I can't remember what it is now.
A wonderful Christmas time.
Yeah. It is pretty Christmassy. yeah, there's a couple weird things. Like I did a secondary 2/5 to the new 4 A flat in the A section, and I preceded that secondary 2/5 with like a setup secondary 2/5 to F that I just kind of said, forget that, we're going somewhere else. So that's a little bit weird, but I think it worked for the most part. Anyway. Oh, and you'll notice the string arpeggios are gone, and I went to just piano chords because I wanted to fit more notes in than I could reasonably fit with the arpeggio figures. So from here on out, they're going to be piano chords. Hopefully, you can kind of hear the voicings well enough. I tried to really make them obvious. So, let's move on. The last part of this 3-level subsection, is a distant key reharm, and this is where things get really fun because most of the notes don't work in the new key, and you're going to have to figure out how to deal with that. So I picked the key of the sharp 5 or flat 6, so G flat major or F sharp major. It's almost like solving a puzzle. It's a lot like solving a puzzle, trying to figure out how to make this work. And you know, I won't promise anything, but let's check. Oh, and again, always keep the melody in mind, first and foremost. I already said that. Let's go. Okay. So I'll talk a little bit. Well, should I play it first or should I talk about it first? Play first. Okay. Let's talk about the first half, and then we'll do the second half. So the first half, I was very pleased with the first 4 bars, because I was thinking like, okay, so say we're in the key of F sharp, how do I fit basically a B flat triad into the key of F sharp? And I was thinking, B flat fits, that's the 3rd. F fits, that's the major 7th. It'll just be a really pretty note. And I was thinking that D doesn't fit, you know, like a gross. But so I was thinking, okay, well, that's the flat 6th of the key. How do you usually hear the flat 6th dealt with? And then I realized a minor 4 chord would totally work perfectly, because the first one you can harmonize as a major 4 chord, and then the minor 4 chord, and then the 1 chord, and that's just like a perfect little progression. So I think that part works well. That's probably the best part of the whole thing. The 3rd line was tough because you start on the flat 2 of the key, and then you go to the minor 3rd, and then the major 7th, and then the sharp 5 flat 6th. So I was like, this one's just going to be gross, and I have to commit to that. So I picked a really stanky chord, the dominant 6th sharp 11 chord, and just sat on it. And theoretically, that's like a secondary dominant that would resolve to the 2 chord, that G minor. So you have your stanky, whatever this is. And then it resolves. But I don't know if this one really flew. It kind of works, but it kind of doesn't. Because you're sitting on that chord for so long, it sounds so gross. And then another hard part was the bar right before the last note of the melody. That having a D to C, like having a D you can deal with, having a C you could deal with, but having both back to back, trying to figure out one chord that would make that make sense, it took a long time. But I settled on, and once again, it doesn't work perfectly, but I settled on a common tone diminished resolution, which is, say you're going to resolve to the 1 chord. You set up so that you're about to hit the 1 chord and everyone's expecting the 1 chord. So say you're doing like a... I love that trope. Because it just catches you off guard. You're like, whoa, that doesn't sound nice. But then the way it resolves like right after, I don't know, I like it a lot. The problem with it, why it doesn't really work that well here, is because the diminished chord comes a beat earlier than it would typically come if you're going to write a song that uses this trope. So, you know, it's not perfect, but you know, it still kind of works. It's functional, right? Sort of. Anyway, let's listen. Do you want to listen to the first half again? Yeah. I saw a couple no's. Too bad. Oh, sup?
Can you play just like an F sharp cadence just to kind of get our ears into F sharp?
Yeah, good idea. So say we do like I'll do a really. F sharp. So B section. This one, again, other than the last line, I think it works pretty much perfectly. The last line is tough just because the melody is so strong, like 3, 2, 1, we're in B flat. It really doesn't want to move to a different key. But so this one, for the B section, I moved to the key of the new 5 chord, C sharp or D flat. Because it just happened to work really well that like a really generic kind of 2, 5, 1, 6 progression fits over the melody. The A natural could harmonize as the flat 9th of the new 5 chord. So which works. It makes the sound not normal or not weird. And then the D natural in the second line was kind of a weird one, but I used kind of it's a jazz trope where you have a 2-5 and you're going to another 2-5, so you just stick the 2-5 a half step up in between the two. So instead of going like, so it sounds like, oh no, sorry. Yeah, you approach a 2-5 progression with a 2-5 progression a half step up, and it kind of works. It goes like, it's like you're out for a little bit, but you come back in relatively unscathed. And that F minor 7, just chromatic slide down to E minor 7. It's all right. It works. It's relatively smooth. But yeah, so I'm drawing from a lot of jazz tropes because that's where a lot of my background is. So that's one reason. But that's also where a lot of the more adventurous harmonic exploration happens, and that's where a lot of reharm happens. Like I said earlier, jazz has a tradition, a long-standing tradition of stupid reharms. So. Do we want to hear this again, or should we just move on?
Yeah, hear it.
All right. From the second half.
One more time.
One more time. Works. I tried to go back to F sharp for the end because this is supposed to be in the key of F sharp all the way through, but you know. So level 6, we're getting pretty deep into it here. Level 6 is kind of a lot more hippy dippy. So far, it's been very organized, very structural, very how do I make these notes make sense in putting various limitations on myself. But this is kind of where you start finger painting a little bit and just thinking, so here I have a bar with a B flat and an F in it. what could I harmonize this with that would make it sound really weird or out there or cool or, you know. It can be tough to do this without it just turning into chaos, but it can also be really interesting. And there's a lot of, you know, you think of like modal jazz or, you know, jazz fusion, a lot of jazz that uses these kinds of colors. One tip that I'll say is think about the bass line when you're doing this. The melody, obviously always keep the melody in mind, but then think about the bass line as sort of a counter melody. And like, how do you make the bass line make sense? Because if the bass line makes sense and the melody makes sense, then you can forgive a lot of garbage in the middle, you know? So this one, I was stealing a lot of tropes from Wayne Shorter, who's a phenomenal jazz saxophonist and composer, and he did this kind of writing a lot where it's playing with different colors of really exotic chords and putting chords together that shouldn't necessarily fit together, but the contrast creates a really interesting color. So I took a couple of his ideas. It's based around the kind of minor 1 to major flat 2 and that kind of relationship. So it's an interesting color, and it actually works with the melody well. So I went for a more sparse, kind of 1 chord every 2 bars, kind of as a challenge to see like if I could fit more notes into 1 chord, but then, you know, it wasn't actually that challenging because the melody is so slow. Let's take a listen to it, and you can see for yourself before I really dive in. It's kind of moody. This one, the approach is very much, here's the melody note or notes, what kind of weird extension would this be? Like if I wanted to make that F third, I could make it a D flat, that's a bad example. If I wanted to take, the F in line 2, I was like, okay, we've heard the 1 to flat 2, back to 1, probably expecting a flat 2 to come next. So what can I make this melody note that takes you by surprise? Well, if it's the sharp 11. Okay, so what would it be the sharp 11 of? Some kind of B chord. B major maybe, B dominant works. You know, I could have chosen either. I went with B dominant because I think it made more of a fuss. The third line is a little bit weird, but it's kind of a bastardization of a 1-5-2-6 where you have, or a 2-5-1-6, I mean. So a normal 2-5-1 would be G minor, C, F, right? So I'm like, how do I take that? That's strong bass motion, right? But how do I make it sound cooler, more interesting? And so another rule, another tip is if the melody note is a really stable note, then the chord can be weirder. And if you make the melody note an extension, a really colorful extension that sounds really nice, but then you kind of have to play it safer. So this one, I was trying to put in a really weird chord. And the note was a G. I put it over a G bass, and then I made it a G11 with the 4th and the 3rd. Which isn't a bad sound. You may disagree. But I kind of like it. It's a little unwieldy. Like that probably stood out as a particularly weird bar, right? So I don't know if this experiment results are inconclusive, but I think, you know, it was worth a shot, at least. So then the following bar, an A over a C bass line. One chord quality that I love is the dominant 13 with the flat 9. So you get super colorful, awesome, love it, great chord. So I was happy to throw that in. And then bar 3, again, you have the root note in the melody. So I decided to make it a slash chord. So you have the root and the bass and the root and the melody. And so I filled it in with an entirely new chord. Which that's a common like sus chord trope, is the like E flat major 7 over F. You take the root note down a whole step, build a major 7 off that, make that slash chord, and it's a very like kind of funky almost. So that's not that weird, but having it be the target, going like 2, 5, 1 is a little bit unexpected. Anyway, and then the same thing with that following D. I was thinking, if this was the sharp 11 of a chord, you know, what would it be? There's always opportunities like that to, even in something weird like this, try and keep some kind of consistent logic of like, oh, this one has a lot of dominant sharp 11 chords with a sharp 11th in the melody. I can kind of tie it together if, with, you know, otherwise it has the potential to sound like just random chords, and that's not what you want. You want it to sound deliberate, even if it's weird. Yeah, should we listen to it again? Sure. Let's listen to it again. We got time. I think we have time. Kind of works. So this brings us to our final level. I've had a great time talking to you guys. This one is where it gets bananas. So this is similar to level 6, which was pretty bananas, granted. But this time, instead of just focusing on the melody and saying, okay, how could I make this interesting with chords, you're thinking of each chord as an amalgamation of melodic lines. So almost polyphony, almost, you know, like imagining each note in the chord was a saxophone or a voice or some kind of instrument, and you want to make each note move in a way that makes sense on its own, and then when you put them together, have it be weird. And taking this approach allows you to justify some pretty out there stuff, I found. One trick that I found super interesting was to, when you think in terms of voicings like this, you start to identify what notes are the most important in a chord. So, say you have a 5-1. We know that works, right? That's what I should have done. Sounds super normal. Why does that work? You may have heard this before, but the flat 7th and the 3rd of the 5 chord want to move. 7th wants to move down, 3rd wants to move up. You get this nice resolution. So I thought, okay, so I have this little tritone that wants to move to this. So what other chords could I put that have this same tritone that aren't F in the key of B flat? So I was thinking, okay, well, I'll show you what I was thinking. So I thought, this one I filled in, I didn't go chord by chord. I wasn't like, okay, start on this, what's in bar 2? Okay, what's in bar 3? No, I picked points of resolution first and then filled in the gaps. So bar 4, I was thinking, okay, what else has an E flat and an A in it? How about F sharp minor 6? It does, you know. So does that move to B flat? Kind of. It's weird, but it works. Especially I made the bass motion smoother. So instead of jumping up a 3rd, it just slides down a half step. So you get this. The voice leading's there. So even though you would never see like a textbook that says, you can use a flat 6 minor 6 chord to 1. Like you're not gonna see that anywhere, but it does, it works. And so I knew, I did kind of want to keep some of the chords the same as the original so you could have a reference point of what was happening. So I kept the first chord B flat, just normal B flat. And so I had my B flat and I had my G flat minor major 7. Oh, because the melody is the major 7th. keeping the melody in mind. Like, okay, we have to add another extension there. That's fine. So I was thinking, how do I get from B flat to G flat minor major 7? Okay, well, let's see. We can walk down in the bass. Think about the bass first, right? So B flat, A, G, G flat, F. That's a really smooth little bass line, right? Okay, so we have A with a D and a B flat over it. That's gross. That shouldn't be there. But how can we make it work? Okay, well, you could think an A chord with a B flat on it, that's a flat 9, that's a Phrygian kind of sound. Okay, so you could put like a Phrygian kind of chord. So how about an A minor 7 flat 9? That justifies the bass and the melody working together. Doesn't sound great, but it works theoretically, and because the voices are moving in a logical way, the dissonance can be kind of justified. Like, it doesn't sound as bad as you might think, I promise. Let's take this really line by line. So the third chord was pretty, I think I just kind of decided that's what I want to do. Oh no, you know what I was thinking? I had this in the fourth bar, I had that voicing there. And so I was like, you know, I had bars 2 and 4, and I just thought, like, how would the voices move to get from one to the next? So the B flat in the A minor chord, if that stayed there, it would just have to, if that stayed there for bar 3, it would just have to slide down a half step for bar 4. Okay, that makes sense. You know, the G and the E flat moves to an F and E flat, moves down to a D flat and E flat. That's a very sensical movement. So I just kind of went voice by voice and then looked at the chord and said, okay, it's like an E flat with the second over a G in the bass. That's a chord you hear sometimes. Like it's kind of nice. I like that one. So let's listen to the first line. You can hear what I'm talking about. It worked surprisingly well, right? Yeah. I was pretty psyched when I heard it. I was like, hey, this theory thing's not so bad. So then moving on. Okay, you know what I'll do is do you want to hear it first?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. I realize, like, I've already heard these a bunch of times, so it's easy for me to talk about them and know what I'm talking about, but it might be hard if you haven't. So let's listen. Well, let's go back to the beginning. It's 30 seconds long. Surprisingly, like, the last one was grosser, right? Thank you. Yeah, I think, level 6 sounds worse than level 7. Level 7 sounds more normal somehow. But I guess it's because the voice leading is smooth. So I don't know if I'll go through every bar in detail, just because that would be a lot to do. But, and we're not, we're a little tight on time. I do want to point out a couple things that I really had fun deciding. One would be, like so in bar 6, the E dominant chord in the second line, I knew I wanted that C minor 11 to be there, because it has the 11th in the melody, and that's cool, and that's in the original. So I kept that there. And I had the B flat 2 bars before it. And I thought it would be cool to quote that kind of walk down in the melody that in the bass. So you might have recognized under that E7 chord, I do which is a transposed version of that motif. And even though E7 to C minor is kind of a gross move to make, well, the reason why I picked it was the same thing as before. G7 to C minor is perfect, right? So I was like, okay, the way why that works is the B flat, F, and maybe the flat 9. That's really common too. B flat, F, A flat, Resolves really nicely to a C minor chord. What other chords have a B, an F, and an A flat in them? E7 with a flat 9. You know, it's a G sharp, technically not an A flat, but it's the same note. So this is my experiment. Okay, well that works. And the bass from F to E is really smooth, and I can do that walk down thing to get to C. Does it work? And then I tried it, and it kind of worked. So I thought, okay, that's great. Then there are a couple other, there's two other things I want to point out. In the third bar, that B over G I have is technically a B over G7. So what we have in the left hand is a G7 voicing, and then in the right hand, a B major triad. Shouldn't work, right? That doesn't make sense. Why it works is because of the voice leading. And I stole this from Gil Evans' arrangement of Israel off Birth of the Cool. He does this. And I found it, I got the scorebook and I found this and I just fell in love with it because it's so cool. A relatively common voicing for a minor chord is to have the minor chord and then have a major triad built off the seventh. So really colorful kind of minor 11 sound. That's a B flat triad over a C minor sound. If you did that for a D minor chord, you'd get a. So it's a C triad over D minor. So if you're on D minor and you want to get to C minor, a voicing option that makes a lot of sense is just take that triad in the voicing and just walk it down chromatically, right? And then, so that's a functional move, like it makes sense. And then in the left hand, just the D minor to G to C minor. That's super functional too. So it's like two different functional ideas that don't work together, working together is the idea there. So I was happy with how that came out. And then the other thing that I was specifically trying to put in somewhere was Jacob Collier's super hyper mega stupid Lydian. Does people know about this? He has this idea, for those of you who don't know, that if you keep stacking fifths up and up and up, you get the Lydian scale. You get the collection of notes that is the Lydian scale. I don't have a pedal. If you stack fifths from C up, 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 you get F sharp. And that's 7 notes, that's a scale, that's the Lydian scale. If you stack another fifth on top of that, you get a C sharp. And so you get this kind of like major 7 with a flat 9. And it's weird, but it doesn't not work, you know? Like it's kind of a cool sound. Maybe it takes a little getting used to. But I wanted to put it in. So I took the second last bar before the last note, and I saw, okay, well there's a D in the melody. If I made that a sharp 11, you can start to see my, go-to trick here. It would be a sharp 11 of an A flat chord. That's a very Lydian thing to have a sharp 11. What if I made that a super Lydian thing and added an A natural in the voicing? And then, also that fits in with my idea that I've been talking about. You have your E flat and A resolving to B flat. What if you harmonize the A as the flat 9 over this stupid Lydian chord, right? And it's a little jarring, I think, but it kind of does work. So what I'm going to do is try and find like the third bar and just listen for that weird B over G7 chord and how that resolves, and then notice the major 7 flat 9 thing. So let's see. Okay. So this is the E minor here. We made it home okay. We did it. You know what? That's it. Those are my 7 levels. as I touched on before, if you're making a reharm that's supposed to sound good the whole time, you might not want to commit yourself to one of these ideas, but just kind of borrow from each. But I will say each level does make a really good exercise for practicing this kind of stuff. We do have like 4 minutes if anyone has any questions. And then you can go. No, you can go now if you want. Yes, sir.
I'd just like to say thank you for mentioning it on your channel. That's the reason that I'm here.
Oh, awesome. Well, I'm glad you're here. That's great.
I kind of got a feel of the bar by bar. There was like a Latino village transitioning into nighttime.
Interesting. I haven't checked out, like I've heard it, but I haven't analyzed that piece, so I'll have to do that. Yes, sir.
An example, or in the 6th example, I know you were doing it as a bar by bar, whatnot, and in all of the other examples at the end of that first page, you're coming back to home with tonic and whatnot, or at least some kind of resolution. In that one, you don't. Is there a reason why you did that? Is like more of like a leading to the next page because that's what it sounds like, or is it just something else you decided to do?
I think I just had kind of a different approach. Like for the last example, if I took out all of the tonic chords and left no roadmap of the original version, I was worried it would sound too just like random, So I think, maybe I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think having those points of, oh yes, that's how it was before, kind of highlights all the crazy stuff in the middle, where you can say, oh, that's really different from how it used to be, instead of this is some new weird chord progression, if that makes sense. That was my thought process anyway.
Will the slides for these talks you've given at MAGWest be up anywhere?
That's a good idea. Yeah, I'll put them up, and then, how do I get it to you? I'll tweet out a link. You guys can find me on Twitter. I have a big pink picture. Yeah, I'll tweet out a link. I'll put them in a Google Drive. I'll do that soon.
A little unrelated to your presentation today, but what's something that you're really looking forward to doing with your YouTube channel and with, or something that you've had in the back burner that you really want to get to, but haven't yet?
Steal your thunder, Joe. Question.
Oh, you don't have to say it if you don't want to.
Oh, no.
Someone else will come out with the video first.
Yeah. No, the YouTube channel, I'm in a really good place with. I'm happy with how it's doing, and I'm enjoying the work. Lately, I've been thinking about trying to put out some kind of music, because I feel a little bit like an imposter, always talking about, like, this is good music. I know what I'm talking about. And then, like, I have nothing else out that people can listen to. So, there's nothing to look forward to yet in that regard, but that's something I've been thinking about lately.
Do it.
I will, for you. Okay. One last question. In the back. Hey.
I noticed that a lot of your reharmonization techniques, they involve more working with harmonies and looking how harmonies interact with each other. Can you often go the other direction and look instead of the counterpoint and see how you can change that around instead? Because oftentimes you can get very different sounds. You touched on it a little bit when you talked about voices.
Right. Yes, that was definitely more my focus for this last level, this last tier, is like really taking it step by step, voice by voice, and trying to think of like what, you can go even farther with it and turn it into almost a chorale where you're making each voice like a real melody, which I didn't do. But, that's really hard. For sure, yeah. Don't take this as the be-all, end-all. Like, this is reharmonization. Like, this is just what I've been working on this last month, trying to prepare a panel. So there's plenty to experiment with. There's plenty more info out there. Thank you guys all so much for coming. I had a blast.